Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to go over some really interesting topics, things that are going to really affect not only our budget, but our kids. And there's no more sacred topic than doing things that affect Milford children positively. And to lead us off, we have the ringleader of the activities. Why don't we start with an introduction, Kevin?
Sure. Kevin McIntyre. I'm the superintendent of the Milford Public Schools. Very happy to be here. A lot of exciting things happening in the schools in the past year and kind of moving forward.
Well, the big one that everybody's speculating on is the new high school. It seems like we've taken the first step.
We have, this was our third statement of interest that we submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And what a statement of interest is basically a pretty comprehensive program proposal. And each year we've moved a little further along in the process, and this year they've invited us into what's called the eligibility period. And what that means is there's a number of tasks we need to complete during like this 270-day window to kind of move the project forward, basically.
So now, we just got Woodland. It seems like a long time ago, but what?
So Woodland's 8 years old now.
8 years old?
8 years old, yes.
So I was surprised that the high school got accepted so quickly, because of the 300 towns and cities. When we went to the meeting about eligibility, these other towns are putting up schools that are 100 years old, 90 years old.
Yeah, so I would say it's a combination of things. I think one thing that they looked at is we're looking at one option where we may bring the 8th grade over to the high school. And what that will do is it'll open up space for the entire district. And as you know, we're busting at the seams. We're adding classrooms wherever we can, or maybe we shouldn't be adding classrooms. And, that's big. And the building's now just about 50 years old. I think it turned 50 years old this year. And it's going to be...
My 50th reunion is this year.
So there you go. And, a lot of our systems are aging, failing, ready for replacement. When you think about things like the roof, the plumbing, the electrical, windows, doors, HVAC, plumbing. I might have said plumbing twice. Those are the types of things that they're really looking at. So it's a combination of a need to update and upgrade the facility, as well as serving a broader purpose of alleviating space needs across the entire community, the entire school district.
Now, the SBA won't let you project growth in the future, but will they let us build a bigger building footprint if we include the 8th grade?
They will. They will if we add additional students. But they basically look at we have to do a thing called an enrollment study. They'll look at the enrollment study and base the square footage of the project on a particular number, based on a pretty complex formula that they do for every project in the state.
Now, realistically, we're over the square footage per person.
Correct. But you could also drive probably a Mack truck down that main hallway. So I don't think they're going to build buildings like that where you have these big hallways. Our library media center is fantastic, but it's like a multi-level space. I think they really look at kind of maximizing every square foot for like educational purposes.
Well, ever since Newton North broke the bank, I think Brockton's got the record.
Well, Brockton's looking at, I think, $1 billion project with a B. And they have more students at the high school than we have in Milford overall, so it's a very big project. But when you think about $1 billion for a high school, it's crazy.
Well, the amazing part to me is the state says they'll pay for 50%. I think it comes out 40-some% that they'll pay.
We might do a little better in terms of reimbursement this time around, yeah. I'm not quite sure what that number will be, but I think we're going to do a little bit better than we did last time.
Well, the question always comes out, to build a new building or to renovate? Any thoughts?
So part of the process of this eligibility period is kind of doing like a self-study and a lot of planning. And so we'll do a feasibility study at the conclusion of the eligibility period where we will look at, I think, 2 questions really. There might be more than 2, but 2 big questions. One is a new building or a renovation. I think it'll be a renovation. I think that's the most likely avenue, but we have to kind of go down that road. We already know from the Woodland project, there's really not a lot of good other sites in Milford to build kind of a pretty significant comprehensive high school that can kind of handle the traffic and the field space and all that. And then the second question we will have answered is, do we bring the 8th grade over or not? And those are really the two big questions of the feasibility study.
The 8th grade coming out of Stacy makes sense to me on a cursory level, because when I think about it, we got 5 major schools in Milford.
Mm-hmm.
Average life of a school is 40 to 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
So Stacy would be another 15 years before it would come up.
Correct.
That's kind of a tough nut to wait 15 more years.
It is.
Stacy's kind of full now.
Right.
So bringing it over makes all the sense in the world.
It does, and there's a couple good benefits you get from it. Number one, it creates a more of a connection between the 8th graders and the high school community, which I think is fantastic, particularly where 8th grade is a point where, a lot of students will choose to go to private schools or vocational schools or maybe other options. I think when they're in this brand new high school, they're going to say, I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
The other thing we can do is we can offer some advanced classes to our 8th graders in a little more of a practical way than we could previously, which I think is great because they can take some of the high school classes. And I think it's a connection to some of the extracurricular programs as well. And really just opening up that space at Stacy. And what we'll do is we'll bring some specialized programming into the space where the 8th graders were, and also bring some offices, like district-wide offices into that space too.
You brought up, and I agree with you, I don't see how, one, it's feasible economically to build a new school.
Mm-hmm.
Because Tri-County just came in, and that was what, close to 300 million?
I believe so. And I mean, you look at Northbridge just did a very similar elementary school to Woodland. I want to say 5 or 6, they completed the project 5 or 6 years after it, and it was double the cost. I think it was about 120, 130 million.
Well, I remember when we did Brookside, we had to build half a school by adding on to the high school, adding on to Memorial, just to take care of 300 kids temporarily.
Right.
I don't know where you would stock 1,300 children.
Right. Yeah, I think it would have to be a phased project. I really see it, where the courtyard is, where the little kind of catwalk is. I see that as being maybe where the first new wing gets built, and then we kind of phase it in.
See, that makes sense to me, because the other thing I thought of, it'd be nice to have a brand new school, just like in '74 when my first walked into that high school. It was gorgeous.
Right.
But I sit there and say, where could we put it?
Right.
The only place we have enough dirt is Asylum Street.
Mm-hmm.
And that major highway, Route 140,
Right.
to take care of the traffic.
Right.
And then God help us if you lived on any of the university streets.
Correct.
High school kids will always be high school kids.
That is a true fact.
And they will be challenging to control their driving through side streets.
Right.
So I don't see where we could build a new school. And God help you if you lived on the Medway side of Milford. To get across town, you'd have to start from Tuesday to get there on the Friday.
Yeah, I think logistically, I don't see it going anyplace but where it is. I could see if, they do a study and it makes more sense to do a new building, I would see it happening, very similar to what we did with Woodland, right on the same site, and then knocking the building down and replacing like parking lots. And
But the size.
Yeah.
Woodland, let's face it, we barely had enough room to do what we wanted.
Correct.
Taking over, we'll talk about the new soccer football field.
Yeah.
I hate to see that destroyed in the process.
Yeah, I that's why I think a renovation is probably our most likely
Well,
one.
it makes sense what you're saying, because that courtyard, I think Roland St. Jean put some vegetable gardens out there at one point. Nobody's ever used it. Building a wing A there and then phasing wing A into it, wing B, makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, and again, I think, we're going to have architects and, I think, different folks with planning expertise and school building expertise really look at the project, the opportunity, but I think we will end up
Well, when you
landing
think
on-
about step one was getting on the list.
Correct.
And we made sure, and this is years ago, that we tucked away 1.5 to 1.7 million
Mm-hmm.
for the feasibility study.
Right.
So the SBA couldn't have any questions to say, will you get the support of the town?
Correct.
I mean, I would have loved them to ask that question for you to say, yeah, 5 years ago they put the money away just in case.
No, and I answered when I was speaking to one of our friends at the MSBA. I said that very thing. I said, we've already got the funds set aside for a feasibility study, ready to go when you guys green light us for this project. And I was very pleased. I thought it was going to be a couple more years before we were going to get, invited into the program. So I was actually thrilled that we were invited in this year.
Well, we have to compete with 300 and some odd cities and towns with half a dozen schools in each of them. So getting accepted to apply, to me, is a huge step.
It's like getting into an Ivy League school, I think, in terms of percentage-wise. It takes a few times. It takes a good proposal. I think it takes, the commitment of the community. We had a very positive experience with the Woodland project recently. I think the MSBA really enjoyed working with us. We have invited them on site a number of times to do presentations. So we've developed a really nice relationship with them.
Yeah, and I think when they see how the money was spent, no terracotta floors, no.
No.
You know,
It's a phenomenal building, but it was well built, and it's absolutely meeting our needs. But it's not the what do they call the thing in Newton North, the Taj Mahal of Newton North?
well, I mean, that was just, it broke the mold.
Right.
When back then everything was being 80 million and they went 200.
Correct.
And I can see if I'm on the SBA committee, I get a pocket full of money,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to make sure it's spread as far as I can. Because listening to some of your competitors, I hate to deem them that way, but they were competing
Absolutely,
for money.
we're competing for the spots.
When they're saying that the school is 80 years old and here's the problems with it, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, there's some real sob stories out there that were kind of selected with us. But I have to say, I think it's time. It's the school, the Milford High School has served the community very well. We use that building from sunup well past sunset every single day. We have things going on in the pool, in the gym, all kinds of programs running for community use throughout the building.
And that's an interesting point, because if we were building a new school, the SBA wouldn't subsidize the pool.
Correct. So we would have to support any renovations to the kind of pool
Dollar for
facility.
dollar.
Correct.
And realistically, the square footage, I don't think people understand that when you go square foot per child, we would have to cut back.
If we were to follow the exact formula and do kind of a new build, it'd be a smaller footprint for sure.
If we wanted a new building, then you can't say you're renovating existing.
Correct.
So they would say you get X square feet per pupil, figure out how to put the sardines in the can.
Correct.
And things like.
Yeah, and we're seeing, I mean, we saw that at Woodland. Like, Woodland is already at capacity right now.
Wow.
And, that building is 8 years old, but we've seen a pretty significant increase in student population over the last decade that hasn't come from new housing or births at Milford Hospital. They're folks that are coming from outside the community.
We'll talk about the effect on school choice, but now you start looking at the high school. I think we're looking at a generational opportunity with the new high school.
Correct.
I mean, back in '69, we ran into the question of, why do we need a pool? Is the pool really going to get used? Will it really help the students in the community? And if I was to ask you about the pool today, what would you? I'm not going to ask Mr. Filosa.
It's funny. I had a conversation with Dave Chaplin today, actually.
And Dave Chappie.
Who's another kind of icon connected to the swimming programs in Milford. And, there's such pride in the pool. It's used all the time. We have, water aerobics that start at like 5 or 6 in the morning for some of our senior citizens, to our swim teams, our gym classes use it. We have local club teams that use it. There's recreational swim. It's used all the time. And if we have to like close the pool down for a snow day or, there needs to be a repair, I get about 3 or 4 phone calls saying, "What are you doing?"
Well, Chappie really epitomizes what you want. Is somebody who knows what he's doing, is professional, and loves the pool.
Correct.
It's his. It's not his, it's ours, but
But he treats it like it's his
like a sense of
own-
pride.
Yeah, 100%. And he's retired now, but I see more of him since he's been retired.
except for the payment. How do you tell the difference?
He's there all the time.
I was going to say, there's a man who you really could say, is he an employee still? He's still doing so much for the pool and the community.
His heart and soul goes into the swim teams and the swim programs and water safety and there's such a commitment there and our pool is used for the the regional meets, the state meets, the league meets, because we have an opportunity for spectators to be there.
Well, the bleachers or whatever
Correct.
they call them.
Correct. And you just don't see that in pools in other communities.
No, we've gone to pools where when my daughters were swimming, of course my daughters always swam heat 1, 38, and 64 or something.
That's how it works.
But you had to go in. Then as soon as your daughter swam the 2 minutes or whatever, you had to leave so other parents could go in.
Right.
It was annoying,
Right.
but not at Milford High.
No, it's really a fantastic facility, and my hope is, and I'm sure there's such passion in the broader Milford community that I can't see us not kind of renovating that, with local dollars to match the newer renovated building.
So let me put you on the spot. Field house, yes or no?
I would love a field house. I think it could be, again, I think the high school is the jewel of the community. I think this could be kind of the part of the crown the jewel sits on. I think if we had a field house, it would have so many benefits beyond just the use of the high school students and the K-12 students. I think we'd be using that facility for the community every single evening, every single weekend. It would allow us to have a comfortable indoor graduation if there was inclement weather. It would allow our track teams to not be running down the hallways for practices in the wintertime. And I think it would provide multiple teams all season the opportunity to practice together if there was bad weather in, say, the fall or the spring.
Well, that was a funny thing. I was in the high school and these kids are running and you feel like saying, hey, no running in the school. And then you say, oh, wait a minute, they're the track
Like somebody's
team.
timing them at the end.
They're supposed to be running.
Yeah,
But-
they were. We had a budget meeting on Saturday, and they were kind of doing their sprints down that main hallway. But yeah, I think there's so many benefits to and I think we could maybe open some offices that would provide additional community support within
Well,
the field house.
let's be practical and say we're going to renovate.
Mhm.
So spending a couple $100 million is nuts, that kind of money.
Correct.
But it's no more nuttier to spend $207 million and build a field house. Just like the argument of the pool. Do we really need a pool? Well, if Milford was hurting and couldn't provide a good education to children, the answer is no.
Correct.
But luckily, our department heads treat our municipal money like theirs. We've had 16 years in a row of surplus.
Mm-hmm.
Very few towns can say that.
Yeah, and that's when you think about the last 16 years, there's been some very good economic times and some not so great economic times, and that's been consistent.
Well, the one thing that I'll come out and say publicly, because I've said it many times, Milford takes care of its kids.
Mm-hmm.
When you think of town meeting, I've not seen town meeting turn its back on things that our kids needed. So I don't even hear any dissension amongst we need to do something to the high school.
Yeah, I've heard pretty consistent support from everyone that's kind of reached out to me or I've had conversations with. I think they, they see some of the challenges we've been faced with in the last few years with leaks in the roof and, our boilers going down this fall heading into winter. I think there's tremendous, like whenever we've asked anything of the community as a school system, I think people have enthusiastically supported it, which I'm very appreciative of and I don't take for granted.
Yeah, I forgot about the boilers. And it's amazing because you can't just go down to Ye-O Boilers or Us and order
Correct.
pipes for 50-year-old boilers.
Correct.
But that was only, I mean, it was a couple days, but
Yeah. Yeah, but it's, it makes it uncomfortable. It's, and even with, our boilers fully functioning, there's some uneven heating throughout the building just because of the age of the system.
oh, it's 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you see, let's assume the town takes advantage of the generational opportunity like we did the pool and puts in a field house. Do you see any other major changes in the high school?
The only other thing I would say is that it would be, just bringing the eighth grade over would be the potential big shift. And that would turn a building that serves about 1,500 students, if you count the preschool students that we have on campus, to a campus that serves 1,800 students. And, I see that as the only other difference. I think the field house, if we're able to, if we see that community support and interest, I think that would be a tremendous resource. I think, keeping the pool, I think, is essential based on just the history and the culture around kind of swimming and all the programming that happens in town. But yeah, those two things would be the big changes. The other thing we're exploring is what's called Chapter 74 programming, which is vocational programming. So we're looking at, and everything's cyclical in education, because probably when you graduated from Milford High School, the big shops that we have computer labs and some other things in were an auto shop, a wood shop, and so I think that's potentially coming back and something we're going to explore. And I think that's probably the only other major shift.
And there I tip my hat, because I've said a number of times, when I grew up, you hit 8th grade, and that was the decision point. If I'm going to go to college, I go to Milford High.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to be a tradesman, I go to BVT.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I love what Dr. Fitz has done for the kids at BVT. His success has been outstanding. The problem I have is people like my dad,
Mm-hmm.
who, if you put him in an organic chemistry class, he wouldn't have done well when he came from Portugal. He had
Right.
4 years of school in Portugal and then had to go out and earn a living. But put a tool in that man's hands, and he was an artist.
Mm-hmm.
I was always in awe of what he could do with his hands. And I wonder, what happens to people like my dad? They can't make it into BVT because they're not in the top, whatever it is, 10, 15% of the academic roles.
Right. So we have a building trades program in place right now that's very, very popular, where it's basically woodworking, construction. They make connections to some kind of like career direct to graduation to career connections with the students, and we have more student interest than we have seats in the program. We've done some things with internships. We're looking at advanced manufacturing. We're looking at some health sciences programs where we can also make some connections with the local community colleges. So the students aren't necessarily going into a degree program, but they're going into a certificate program where they can do some of the work in high school and then complete it after they graduate, and it would set them up for a very lucrative career. Those are the types of programs we're looking
Well,
for.
when we start looking around the mass economy, biotech,
100%.
and one of the biggest issues we have in the biotech community is hiring.
Correct.
And you sit there and say, a biotech operator, somebody right out of high school, can make 50 grand a year
Right. Right.
or more.
Right.
I sit there and say, I wish I had had that chance
Mm-hmm.
to come out, instead of making my 18 when I graduated, being able to start a career at a wage that you can support yourself.
Correct. And there's a lot of opportunities where, if you have some skills, you don't necessarily have to go to college to, have that kind of middle-class lifestyle, for lack of a better term.
No, but I mean, some of the basic skills you learn in plumbing and as an electrician translate directly to biotech plants.
Mm-hmm.
So putting programs in like that, being self-centered here would help people like my father.
Right, right.
That he could come out and get a leg up on all the other communities.
And that's what we're trying to do, because we're seeing, and it's a creep, but we're seeing a larger percentage of our population, our high school graduating population, that is looking to maybe not go directly to college or go directly into a career. And we'd rather have them go somewhere where they can do something that's lucrative, that's self-sustaining, that has opportunity for advancement.
That doesn't cost you $300,000.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard now as you talk to kids and you say you best not be going to college just to kill time.
Right.
Because I'm familiar with Holy Cross where I went. It's 80-some thousand a year.
And that's pretty average for
That's
a
a private
institution.
school.
Yeah.
Public school is still, by the time you're done, in the 40s.
Yeah.
So you better really use it to gain an advantage, because if you're coming out with $200,000-300,000 worth of debt, I don't know how the kids start.
It's challenging. You look at, I look at my parents, who, my father went to college, my mother did not, and they had a house that was $60,000, and it was affordable. And now I look at just rents for kids coming out of college, and you're paying $2,500 to $3,500 a month just in rent, and that's more than a mortgage payment was, say, 10 or 15 years ago.
But they didn't have the debt.
Well, correct, and throw another house on top of.
Well, I was always amazed that I was really lucky, because my mom and dad put all their money into my education.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mom was making a whopping $8,000 a year at Draper's.
Okay.
My father was making big bucks, $18,000
Yeah.
at General Motors.
Yeah.
But somehow they came up with $6,000 a year to pay for all my college.
But think about that ratio, though. 8,000 plus 18 is 26,000, with a 6,000, dollar per year tuition for cost
Tuition
of attendance.
and room and board.
Yeah, cost of attendance at Holy Cross. Now look at 80,000 and think about what the average person.
The
in
average person
Massachusetts
doesn't
makes.
make enough to cover that nut.
Correct. So the ratios are all off, and if you're somebody starting out, you're starting probably if it's a 400-meter run, you're probably starting 200 meters behind.
I look at it that I'm doing a 400-meter run with 40 pounds of sand on my back.
Yeah, that's another way to look at it. Yeah.
Now, we got invited to submit a feasibility study. Walk us through, because
Yeah.
we're not talking a year or two for this to happen.
So it's probably a 5 to 7 year process from when we actually start the process on August 1st of 24, which is this summer. That's when our 270-day kind of window kicks in. And there's 8 things that we've got to do during that time period. So we have to do what's called an initial compliance certification, which is just a fair amount of paperwork where you're reviewing kind of all the logistics of the potential project. You have to put together a school building committee. And there's some very specific positions we need on that school building committee. We need some people with expertise in construction. And we had that last time, and they did a phenomenal job.
With Aldo and Jonathan.
Yeah. And Aldo and Jonathan, Aldo, God rest his soul, and Jonathan were there every single day. It was a second job.
Well,
a
the
full-time
joke
job for both
on the
of them.
FinCom was that we saved money on copper wire, because Jonathan and Aldo would grab a penny and keep stretching it until they had all the wire they needed.
That's not. Excuse me, you're making me laugh. It's not untrue. We have to do an educational profile questionnaire, which is basically you just have to do a review of your whole entire program at the high school, and say, this is what we're doing now, this is what we'd like to do in the future with a new building. And that's a pretty significant undertaking. We have to do a Chapter 74 vocational technical education viability documentation. Those were the programs I was just talking about. We're going to look at a building trades program, something in advanced
So
manufacturing.
we can put those in, even though they may compete slightly with BVT.
Potentially, because all the students that might want to take advantage of those programs aren't able to go to BVT to
Right.
do that. Online enrollment projection. That's looking at, and that's the $20,000
That's
question.
got to be the big problem, because every other school system except a handful, are projecting a decline.
Correct.
And yet Milford, I mean, for 40 years I was on your predecessor's case about you adding one student per year.
Right.
Now we'll talk about the growth.
Yeah. So it's a little unpredictable. So we've got to kind of, I think we can't just look at regular projections because it's been, it hasn't been just births and, new construction that's been driving it. We have to hold an enrollment meeting just to kind of confirm, and we probably have to bring in an outfit. We work with NESDEC right now that does enrollment projections for us. We probably have to bring in a group like that's going to kind of discuss it and have kind of a public meeting. Maintenance and planning, capital planning information. What's our maintenance plan? What have we done? What do we plan to do in the future? The local vote, which is for the feasibility study. And then we have to sign what's called a feasibility study agreement, which is similar to the statement of interest where I have to sign off on it, the select board has to sign off on it, and the school committee has to sign off on it.
Well, the question of will we fund the feasibility study shouldn't be a hard one to answer.
I'm hoping we already know the answer to that question because the finances are there. But that's the first phase. That's the first 270 days, basically the first year of the
So we go from
process.
August 24
to April, basically the end of April 25.
May
Yeah.
25.
Yep.
Then what?
And then we start to look at who's going to be involved in the feasibility study, who's our project manager, who are we potentially looking at for construction. We complete the feasibility study. Once that's completed, we get into the design phase, and then the more
So
detailed design phase.
when do we start the design phase?
I would say it's probably like year 2.5, the start of year 3 from here.
So
So two and a half years out.
May 25 turns into August 27,
More than likely,
around.
give or take. It can those like the 270 days is very regulated.
No, I understand.
After
but
that, there's a little bit.
I
of
want to
wiggle
put
room.
perspective. So now
Yeah.
we're sitting here in August of 27.
Yep.
What's the next phase?
We're probably talking 5 years before we stick a shovel in the dirt. Maybe a little less than that if we're aggressive, and then we're probably talking like 7 years before the project's completed. So like let's say August 24, we're probably talking like 30, 31 when we have students in the building.
So that'll be the first student walking through the door.
Correct. And if we do a phased like renovation, it might that might impact the timeline a little bit. Too.
Well, I mean, I don't see a way around it,
Mm-hmm.
even if it delays it a year for the phasing and all of that. Because, like we just went through, building a new building, just economically, it scares the living heck out of me to think 7, 8 years from now what it would cost.
Right.
And I don't see any benefit to it.
Right.
I really don't. I mean, Milford High is a bunker.
Mm-hmm.
The walls are solid.
Yes.
It was built to last.
Yes.
So renovating the inside's kind of like what we did with Stacy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's turned out to be a winner.
Yeah, that's worked out. It really has. It really has. That was done in what, the 97, 95, somewhere
Yeah.
around there?
I remember getting scared when I came back to Milford from Paris. West Street School is now a parking lot. Oliver Street School, all the schools I went to, Oliver got turned into apartments.
Mm-hmm.
Spruce Street was the library. Stacy was boarded up.
Right.
I said, there's something wrong in this trend.
Good news, bad news is there's not a ton of space to put, larger educational kind of facilities anymore within the community. Like you said, you talk about Asylum Street, or you talk about a couple of the spaces where we could maybe look at it that we did when we were looking at the Woodland project. But, I think we're looking at mostly on-site type projects.
And Kevin, I don't see the need.
Mm-hmm.
Woodland, its footprint
Mm-hmm.
was woefully undersized.
Correct.
So when we went to the new Woodland, you needed a lot more geography.
Yeah.
Personal opinion with no data, I don't see that we have to expand the high school footprint monumentally.
No, even if we had the 8th grade, I think you're going to be able to. There's a lot of square footage that I think they would use more efficiently.
Well, that courtyard, we always hope to figure out something to do with it.
We're eating lunch out there kind of consistently, and some classes are going out there. But I would say it's definitely been historically underutilized.
How are we doing with the new kids coming into Milford?
Very, very well. I think,
I mean, we hear this thing of 50 new families renting out the whole Best Western means 100 children.
yeah, I think
Fact or fiction?
partially true, I would say. I think we've added somewhere between 35 and low 40s in terms of new students at this point. We have some families that have kids that aren't quite school age yet. So there's children there, but they're not school age children. They're infants or
Are they all coming to Milford schools?
not every single one. Some are going to other communities that they might have some connection to, or they may have been in school previously. So I would say 20 to 30% of the families are going to other communities for school, which is not uncommon with this program. It's a statewide program.
But it still leaves 40 families being added to Milford.
Correct.
Are they here for the long term, or is it a transition?
It's hard to say at this point. I don't think anybody knows. But based on kind of our experience with immigrant families over the last decade, it really hasn't registered in terms of having a significant impact. I know there's some school systems where it's been very difficult for the school system to kind of integrate the new families in, but we have 160 staff members that speak other languages other than English. We have social workers, support staff. We have a very well-developed EL program, so we're able to kind of bring the students in, assess them, and put them into programs that meet their needs. And it really hasn't had a significant impact in terms of. I think we had a spring where we had about 150 new students enter in February and March, give or take. And again, I don't have the numbers in front of me. That was tough because we weren't expecting the students to come, and we had to kind of create classrooms and space to have 40 students over 13 grades. That hasn't been difficult to kind of have those students jump in and become part of the broader Milford community.
Let me put you on the spot.
Sure.
Brookside.
Yes.
I mean, at first the word came out we were doing modular, and you had people like me immediately go negative, saying, I remember those trailers.
Yeah.
And then we learned modular was where they're being built, not that they're trailers.
Correct.
So it looked good,
Yeah.
but now you've had some time in them. How are they working?
I've got to tell you, the teachers who have classrooms there love it. The students love it. It's really just another wing of the building. It's 6 classrooms, 3 by 3. There's fantastic natural light because all the classrooms have tons of windows. The climate control is excellent. There's direct access to the playground out of the back of the kind of the back end of the wing. I've got to tell you, I visited a number of classrooms that the company that we eventually landed on had built, and everybody had really good things to say about the finished product. I was able to walk in. I was able to talk to a few teachers who have an uncanny ability of telling the truth, and everybody was very, very happy. And I've got to tell you, our Brookside teachers are extremely happy too. They're great modern classrooms.
And the company lived up to their promises?
They did. The only issue we had is the project went over in terms of the timeline. So we were hoping to start before school started. I think we ended up opening, I want to say, sometime in October. But
that wasn't the big concern. The big concern a lot of people had was the bids varied so widely, and we chose one down at the bottom.
Correct. And I think part of it is, I think the companies are savvy, and they saw up to $4 million, and we had one bid come in at $3,995, and this company, I think, came in, and we were looking at it too, kind of a little skeptical. One was way over, and then we did some investigation, and everybody was happy with the results, and they've done a lot of projects all across the country, but a lot of projects in Massachusetts too. And I think the only negative we really had with the project was just the timing of it, because it's just tough to switch after the school year starts.
Yeah, but
and make
even
some changes.
the old high school,
Yeah.
we were supposed to be in September.
Right.
We didn't get in till January of '74. So they hit it within 3 months.
Right. Yeah, I think, and I think that happens with construction projects. You'd rather have the thing done right than done quickly.
Let's see, construction in New England winters. What could happen that would slow
My-
things down?
My biggest nervousness was when we'd committed to knocking down the old Woodland, and the new one wasn't completely done. And I just walked in there, I think it was probably 4 or 5 weeks before it was starting, and said, I don't care what you need to do, but we have students coming in about 4 weeks, so we've got to get this done. And we were able to open on time. But that was probably my most nerve-wracking one. We had, going into the Brookside project, we had a Plan B and a Plan C already in place, because we knew, just in case the project went over, we had classrooms set up and kind of contingency plans in place. But the final result was fantastic.
Now, 3 years ago, you gave a few of us a heart attack when you came out with $6 million in incremental spending that you needed. But the state came through with $7 million.
Correct.
So we've been beneficiaries.
Yeah, we've been big beneficiaries of the Student Opportunity Act, and this is, I think, the third or fourth year, I think out of, it's either 7 or 8, that we're going to be receiving pretty significant investment from the state. And I think this year it's going to be in the vicinity of $8 million additional.
Incremental.
Correct, that's going to stay, as part of our Chapter 70 allocation. And this has really allowed us to catch up from a staffing perspective, because we added about 500 students in the last 7 years, and we never want to say, hey, we think there's going to be another 75 or 100 kids coming in, because we didn't know. And based on, again, our enrollment projections, the births at Milford Hospital, new construction, and the different factors, we were, your one student, historical estimate was generally what they were coming back with, but we were seeing these huge influx of students during the year. And I'd say this past year we were pretty close to caught up from a personnel perspective. I think this next year we will be caught up.
Well, I mean, you always have the Brazilian summer.
Correct.
That you can't predict how many kids are going to be coming here when the schools in Brazil go on vacation.
Correct. And for the last, I'd say 14 or 15 months, I think last year's a great example. We've been very stable, which has been unusual for the past 7 years. We started the year, I think, around 44, 50, and we ended the year at 44, 44, something like that. So it was a difference of 6 students, so we were completely just stable last year, which that's the first time that had happened in about 5 years. This year, we're kind of seeing the same thing. We're seeing a lot of movement in and a lot of movement out, but the numbers are kind of holding, if that makes sense.
Now, a lot of people are confused over the financial impact to Milford of school choice, because we hear that you shut down incoming.
Yeah, we haven't completely shut it down, but we're taking a lot less students than we have.
Well, you got to take the
historically.
ones that are grandfathered.
Correct.
You're not going to take some child who's been with us 4 or 5 years and say, no thanks.
Yeah. So we've kept the students currently in the program, and I'd say we've been very judicious of accepting additional students. It's been very, very limited, and that's because the enrollment has been so unpredictable.
But we make it up. When I see 1.2, 1.3 million negative, oh my God, Kevin,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
Correct.
But on the other hand, that's taken into consideration with the $7 million extra dollars we get
Correct.
in
So
Chapter 70.
we're significantly net ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Dramatically net ahead.
I don't
should
think
say.
people understand that the school choice now is a strange way of counting it,
Correct.
because, towns around us have griped legitimately that they're getting an extra 200,000, 300,000 in Chapter 70, and Milford's getting $7 million.
Yeah, I meet with superintendents, and sometimes I don't even want to share our numbers, because we've really benefited from the program, and it's been a needed investment.
Well, it's when you meet FinCom members, when I meet FinCom members of other towns, I'm the same way. It's like,
Yeah.
well, what was the biggest issue you had financially this year? Fighting over how to spend the surplus?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's an ugly conversation. Particularly, a lot of the communities around us are very small, so like a little fluctuation in money is pretty significant for a place like Hopedale or.
Well,
or
yeah, I mean, they
Douglas or
had the
Sutton.
whole meeting about BVT and what they can afford to pay.
Correct.
And one of the members, one of the participants yelled, "We should limit BVT to the same percentage increases that our local schools get." Chris Moore and I looking at each other said, "No,
We don't want that if
No.
you're looking at Milford as the model.
Milford's been going up 9% a year
Right.
for a myriad of reasons, not just expenses, but the number of kids and all. Please, Dr. Fitz, don't listen to that. We can't afford to have you go up 9%.
Right. Yeah, but we're playing in a very different game than a lot of the communities around us. It's we have a very high needs population. We're at 70% of our students, and when I say high needs, it's someone who falls into one or more of the following three categories. They're an English learner, they're a student with special needs, or they're economically disadvantaged. And our largest growth has been English learners and economically disadvantaged. Our students with special needs, that number's creeping up just a little bit, but we're still below the state average there in terms of percentage of students on IEPs. But that's been pretty flat.
There have
pretty
been
stable.
comments, because I took an ugly position when somebody said, "We've improved our special needs program so much, we're drawing kids from other towns." And I sat there and I said, "And?
Yeah.
That's a bad thing?
Yeah.
If along the way of helping Milford kids, we happen to help kids from other towns that choice in, I frankly don't see a problem."
Or move in. I mean,
Or move in.
I think Milford's a very desirable place to live right now. I think we've seen, and it's happening everywhere, but I think in Milford, and maybe even a little more so. I'm not a real estate expert, but the housing prices have gone up dramatically. We had a Brookside Elementary principal who moved from Indiana to Milford, and he eventually went back to Indiana, and he went back to Indiana with a lot more money in his pocket than after just based on the the increase.
It's amazing you got somebody. When I've been able to recruit people, I can pick them up from the East Coast or the West Coast. The square states in the middle, it's very hard to pull somebody from a square state.
Right.
Because, my brother-in-law got offered to run a company here.
Mm-hmm.
And it was funny because he said, "Well, I know it's going to be more expensive to live in Massachusetts." He has a 3,200 or 3,400 square foot house that is almost $300,000 in his part of Texas.
Mm-hmm.
So he got here and he said, "Well, I expect I'll have to pay $350 or $400. What can I get for that?" And the real estate agent just looked at him and said, "A split?"
Yeah. It's sticker shock if you come from, like you said, the square states in the middle.
And anybody who has
Indiana.
children and always had this puzzles for the states. And you had all the states, and in the middle, they were all square.
Right.
So
Right.
we referred to them as the square state people.
Yeah, and it's a different market on the coast. There's no question about it.
Tell me about the high school field. I was amazed.
I've got to tell you, we've done a number of projects over the years since I've been in Milford, and I don't know if a project has come out even better than expectations. The field is beautiful. The track is fantastic. It's just a showpiece. And the company that does this, and they're one of the big companies that install these fields, is using Milford as an example in their literature and brochures now, because the project just came out so unbelievably.
Who made the decision on the black surround?
We had a couple people kind of bring that up, and we took a look at it, and if you look at I don't know if it's cranberry or kind of that I can't even come up with a color name that a lot of the tracks are. It didn't look great against the red that we had on the field, kind of the Milford red. And we said, red and black are kind of the high school colors. And if we put a black track around the field, not only would it meet the the colors of the community, but it would also really, the red on the field really pops because of it.
I was going to say, whoever did, because if you had told me that you're making this field red and white, I would have said, "That's Milford.
Yeah.
That's the Scarlet Hawk."
Right.
Well, we're going to circle it in black. I would have, black. But oh my God, is it gorgeous?
It looks great. And I've got to tell you, because, it's one of those things you just don't pay attention to. I guess if you're like a runner, you might pay attention to it. But since we started talking about it, I've got, a son who's a senior in high school, and he's an athlete, and so I'm at a lot of different high schools for events. And I'm surprised at how many tracks are black that I just didn't even think about
Yeah.
that were black. It's kind of
Well,
crazy.
I don't even think it's just the black. It's the way the colors, the contrast is set.
It really came out.
It just pops.
It I can't even, I don't even have words because when we saw like them start to pull it up and we're like, hopefully I can get this done in a reasonable amount of time. To the finishing point. And the most interesting thing is the guy who does the lining of the track, and you wouldn't believe how intricate that is because they have all the different spots where people take off from for the different distances of the races, but they measure it out with a computer, and then they use like a computer aided kind of painting system to put the different lines and the circles
Well,
for the
we
track
bought
down.
a GPS directed field liner for all the other fields in town.
Right.
Jim Asm came in, and when he first said that, I was like, yeah, that's kind of seriously. But when we started looking at it, it was like, boy, that's a great decision.
Yeah.
Because not only does it save time and money, it looks nice.
It looks nice. It's accurate. But the athletic director, Pete Boucher, and I were out there several times when they were kind of in the process of putting it down, and we've been around a little bit, and so not much like you go, wow, this is kind of. But we saw that, and we had to get out of there because I think we were wasting the people's time because we kept asking questions, and it was just so like the technology was great, and it was just fascinating how they kind of set it up.
Side question. I think people are amazed when you hear that more than 50% of our kids qualify for free lunch. And I know everybody gets it, which I think is a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, that means that more than half our families of 4 are living on 34 grand or less.
Correct.
How's that working?
I think one of the things we're trying to do is really ensure that, whether you're, coming from a family that's eligible for free and reduced lunch, although again, everybody gets a free lunch now, you can have the same trajectory as any student or any family member. And we have, Lisa Kincaid and her team. She's got some social workers, attendance supervisors, a big support staff that is really trying to make sure that, students and families are getting what they need. We guarantee everybody 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch. We have, programs that happen during vacation where we partner with the YMCA and some other organizations. But the Lisa and her team really work with, trying to, accessing health care, accessing mental health care, making sure housing is available. If there's gaps, how do we support,
Well, the
connecting with
minute
social
you
service
say
agency?
that it's a Carla Tuttle breakfast
Yeah.
or a Carla Tuttle
Oh,
lunch,
it's fantastic.
there's anybody who knows Olivas, anybody who knows Carla,
Mm-hmm.
never has to worry about the quality or the quantity. It's not like she's giving people ketchup and saying it's a vegetable.
Correct. No, and she does a lot of programs where they're sending home like, fresh fruits and vegetables. We're sending home, groceries at different points of the year. And the menu is really like, she's made a number of shifts to the menu to meet, kind of the needs and interests of our,
Well,
students.
I remember when she came to us and said her freezers were falling apart, that she need. Nobody on the FinCom questioned it. It's Carla.
Right.
First of all, she wouldn't spend a penny unless she had to because she'd be buying more food with the extra penny.
Exactly.
But if she's asking for it, she really needs it. And that was our first look into the fact that she's feeding people 12 months a year.
Correct. And we talked about pride earlier in the show, and Carla like feeds every kid like it's her own kid, and nobody goes hungry, and she listens to what they have to say, and she's Carla, so she's doing her thing, but the kids love her, and she's really responsive to.
And she
what
really
people-
takes these kids, because I remember when my daughter was graduating, Carla walked up and said, okay, we got to talk about what you're having for menu at her party. I felt like saying, I was going to ask you if you would do me the honor of catering my party.
Yeah.
But it was not even a question in her mind.
Yeah.
And they did such an incredible job. And then you tie that with Lisa Kincaid. I mean, Lisa, I love her to death, but I'll never forget one night when we were in the media center, and this mother walked in with 3 little kids, middle of November, freezing cold. She had walked from one end of Milford to attend an event in the high school,
Mm-hmm.
and the kids had sweaters on.
Mm-hmm.
Sweaters
Mm-hmm.
in the New England cold.
Right, right.
We happened to call Lisa Kincaid. It was 9 o'clock at night.
And she answered.
There was, yeah, but not even answered. There wasn't even a question of, you realize it's past my bedtime here. It's, I'm not working now. But she immediately told us how to get a hold of a couple coats and one for each kid. And
Yeah.
it's just amazing.
Yeah, she's done a great job, and her team has done a great job of partnering with, local businesses, social service agencies, to ensure students get backpacks, coats. We fill in some of the gaps that, families don't have right now.
Well, she's got that love for these kids that you can't help but say yes.
Correct.
It was like when I was at Holy Cross, Father Brooks had this way about him that you felt his hand going in your pocket. You knew he was extracting money,
Yeah.
but somehow that was okay.
But you felt good about it.
Yeah, that was okay. And it's the same thing with Lisa. When she asks,
Yeah.
you're not questioning motive, you're not questioning use. You
Correct.
know she's doing it for the love of the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. It's 100% true, and she's another one of the many real assets that we have here in the Milford community. That's just incredible.
Any last words for the public for this quarter?
I would just say that, we have a team that's committed to providing the absolute best education for every student that walks through the door. And, we will prepare you for Harvard. We will prepare you for going right into the workforce. We're here to meet your needs.
And I think that's the real key, because I've asked the fundamental question that I asked when my daughter came to Milford schools. Will my daughter get a good education? And Jose Vieira back then said, yes, get involved.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure she gets the best. She'll get a good education, but you want it to be the best it can be? Get involved.
Absolutely.
And all the principals we've dealt with over the years, all the assistant principals, they've always been open to parents coming to them.
100%.
Thank you. We look forward to progress reports.
Yeah, and I'm happy to come back in the spring to give an update of where we're at. Always a pleasure.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, this is Milford. This is what we do to take care of our kids. And as I mentioned before, we're very fortunate that our town meeting, I've never seen them turn their back on Milford kids. Has to be justified, but somehow they always come up with the money and the resources to take care of our kids. So if you're wondering, will you get a good education? You really will. Will you get people who care? The Carlas, the Lisas, and myriads of others, they really do care about these kids, and they really go out of their way to make sure that anything that can be done is done. So thank you for joining. May God bless. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Good night, all, and thank you to our 6 loyal viewers.